Lawbreeze and Gentlegrams, before clashing with Kanye when he became a Klansman, before battling the bearded BBL buffoon exposing Adin to the masses, before the dismantlement of the good music establishment and the brotherhood abandonment, disbandedness and coke copying extravagance, before the simpy sad spirit of Sandra suing son, vulnerability in rap stemmed from two brothers, not just one. The Clipse crafting conscious chronicles of coke admitting fear, doubt, and regret in the bars, backed by behemoth beat makers they were destined to be stars. This is the story of the Sandy Sellers becoming best-selling stellar storytellers, the Clipse climbing the rap game and surviving the stormy weather. Now just like a jet or a dope smoker with a propeller, get that like and subscribe button high flying like a bird's feather. The story of Terrence and Gene Thornton, aka Pusha T and Malice, or no Malice, is rooted in Virginia Beach, but the first stop in the journey was in August of 1972 in the Bronx, New York, when Gene Elliott Thornton Jr., later known as Malice, then after that known as No Malice, was born. His younger brother Terrence Thornton, better known as Pusha T, came along 5 years later in May of 1977. The family spent their early years in New York, but they moved to Virginia Beach in 1979 when Malice and Pusha T were still very young. This was back when Virginia Beach had this strange split personality. On the surface, it was military families and vacation spots, but underneath, the crack trade was spreading through neighborhoods. This was on the cusp of an epidemic that would plague America in the 1980s, the crack epidemic. When Malice and Pusha T first came to Virginia from New York, they had two cousins in Virginia that had this housing project sewn up. Pusha might have just been 3 years old, and Malice was still young as well, but their cousins were big guys and had a strong reputation within the city. According to Malice, nobody would ever mess with them, so it was very easy for Malice to find his way into the drug trade because his cousins ran everything. He started hustling at just 15 years old when Pusha T was just 10.
So you're 15 and he's 10.
Right.
So you start getting involved into the drugs and initially in terms of selling and so forth?
What is this about, man? What is this about? But yeah.
Now, unlike most teenagers and young adults who resort to selling drugs on street corners, Malice didn't necessarily pursue this lifestyle as a means of survival or to escape hardship. Pusha T and Malice were actually raised in a stable, lower middle class household with both parents present. They had a strong male role model in their father, and financial hardship wasn't something they necessarily faced very heavily growing up. Malice even makes reference to this on their brand new album, rapping, "My dad worked overtime, smiled through the struggle, cause my dad wouldn't let us feel what he had to suffer. Mine had made sure he had every base covered." And the Clipse had never hid this reality or tried to embellish their past. But while they did have a comfortable upbringing, they also experienced influences from their environment, which led to many of the experiences they would later build their music careers around. Malice reflected on his childhood saying, "We had a functional house. It didn't even make sense for us to sell drugs. We didn't have the proverbial story of I did this to feed my kids or because the lights were getting cut out. We were just doing it because we wanted to have the latest fashion, the fly kicks. But even at that age, we were very intellectual, so we had all the benefits of the drug dealing without all the nonsense." Pusha T has also spoken on this time period saying, "We all had a decent upbringing, some better than others, but it wasn't a rough and tumble thing. Any crime committed was done out of greed and mischief." And speaking of mischief, you have to think about the dynamic, right? Malice is the older brother, 5 years older, so by the time he's in middle school, which is the prime time age for mischief, he's old enough to not only get in trouble, but explore different avenues, build new hustles and hobbies. And Pusha, being the younger brother, is of course following his older brother's every move. Malice was exposed to and entered the coke trade at around 15 years old, but before he did that, he picked up another hobby in junior high school, rapping. At this time, according to Malice, Pusha T had no actual interest in rapping, but again, he was following his older brother through everything. So as he watched Malice fall in love with the genre and become a well-known lyricist within their Virginia neighborhood, Pusha would ask Malice questions like, "Why do you like this rapper as opposed to that rapper?" And through this curiosity, Malice would slowly teach his brother the foundations of what sparked his creative drive, breaking down bars from his greatest inspirations like Boogie Down Productions, KRS-One, or Big Daddy Kane. He was drawn to these artists in particular because, as he said, they actually had something to say. They had a message, and that message was always structured in calculated rhyming patterns and schemes. But while Malice might have been enthralled by some of hip-hop's most razor-sharp trailblazers, while he might have himself been regarded as a strong MC throughout the neighborhood, Malice didn't initially take the idea of pursuing a rap career seriously at all. Because as he puts it, he always thought being famous was just something that would happen to someone else. Too good to be true, right? He was, however, a part of a group, or a gang as he puts it, which was called Def Dual Productions. Each member of the group was paired with a producer, and one day, the leader of the group had told Malice about an up-and-coming producer he had just met, thinking that his beats would be a good fit for Malice's rapping style, and really for the whole gang in general. In the late 80s, this producer went by DJ Timmy Tim, one of Virginia's best beatmakers, but you probably know him as none other than Timbaland. Timbaland then joined Def Dual Productions, DDG Group, and made beats for all the members. Malice had said, back then, this was like 88, 89, Def Dual Productions, we were always fighting, stealing cars, just doing dumb stuff. I was rapping, but I didn't take it serious. But we were all rappers inside this gang, and Timbaland was supposed to produce the whole thing. So I remember getting Tim's beats, and I was just inspired. I'd go to Tim's house, and you had to kneel down in between two beds to actually record. But while Malice might have not been taking music serious just yet, Timbaland was. And not long after these early years of recording in home studios in between beds, Timbaland gets a record deal and starts working more closely with Jodeci, Missy Elliott, etc. Now, even though he was young, Pusha T remembers this pretty vividly, saying Malice's DJ and producer was Timbaland at the time. And this is in middle school, 8th, 9th grade. So I'm in like 4th grade. Timbaland lived about a mile away from us. My brother would be leaving to go to Timbaland's house to record, and I would start crying ridiculously, so my mother would make him take me along. It was the most annoying thing in the world for my brother. They'd be doing music, and I'd be dancing, and Timbaland's dad would be screaming up the stairs, saying, "Stop jumping up and down up there." That was my childhood. And as he gets older, Timbaland starts branching out. I think he went to work with Jodeci, that whole camp. Me and my homegirl, my childhood friend, she introduces me to Pharrell. Pharrell likes her. I'm not rapping at all. Me and Pharrell just start hanging out. He likes her and starts hanging out with her best friend. Simultaneously, Chad Hugo is also mutual friends with Pharrell. You guys probably know them as two halves of the Neptunes. But this was the late 80s, early 90s. Chad is a local producer, and Malice is getting buzz in the city and just watched his right-hand producer Timbaland take things to the next level. And this is where things for the Clipse start kind of coming into fruition. Pharrell already knew of Malice through his rising buzz in the city and his workings with Chad. Weeks after meeting Pusha T through mutual friends, Pharrell says to Pusha, "Yo, wait a minute, your brother is Gene? Rapping Gene from the beach?" Pusha says, "Yeah," and Pharrell replies, "Yo, you gotta get him to the studio." Pusha rejected the invitation initially, saying, "Nah, my brother works with a different producer." But Pharrell insisted, saying, "No, I know he does. You just gotta get him to come." So sure enough, Pusha makes the connection between Malice and Pharrell. Chad, Pharrell, Malice, they all start working together, but keep in mind, Pusha's not a rapper at this point, but being the younger brother, he's following Malice to the studio every day, watching his older brother lay the foundation and build the skill set. So the first few years of the early 1990s pass, Pharrell and Chad are collaborating more heavily, and in that time period, they form the Neptunes duo. They're producing for Malice, and Pusha T's just there tagging along. But again, like Malice had said, he wasn't really taking rap seriously. He didn't think he could make a living off of it. So in 1992, with his fiancée pregnant and needing to support her, Malice enlisted in the army and completed basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, followed by advanced individual training in Fort Beaver, Virginia. On a side note, growing up in a French-Canadian city, to hear the name Belvoir be pronounced Beaver instead of Belvoir is very weird. Drop a comment if you know why it's pronounced like that, or if I'm just getting it wrong here. But anyways, after 2 years of service, Malice was honorably discharged in 1994. Now remember that Pusha T was following his brother in every facet of life. He was hanging around the same producers, the same artists, the same studios as his brother, but he was also soaking in some of the less positive environments that his brother hang around. When Malice returned from serving in the army, he found out that Pusha T had started hanging around a lot of the same guys that Malice had been with back in the day, and that he began dealing drugs, following the same path Malice had walked before the military. He noticed a shift. During his high school days, it was cool to be the guy who could rap and freestyle. But by the time Pusha T came up, drug dealers were the ones receiving the admiration. And I think this is where the duality of their artistry comes into play. Pusha T gives you the perspective of a kingpin reaping the lavish luxuries that come with a life of crime and drug dealing, but Malice, being the older brother who had the experience prior to Pusha, raps with the weariness of someone who's lived through it and seen the worst sides of that lifestyle. But anyways, while Pusha is now involved with the guys that Malice used to be involved with, Malice, being a married man and a lot older, had more of a drive to start building out a full-fledged career to support his family. So he reconnects with Chad and Pharrell after the army, and by this point in 1994, Pharrell had already secured his first platinum plaque for writing Teddy Riley's verse on the song Rump Shaker. Pharrell's accomplishments were proof to Malice that a career in music could be a reality. so he went full force. With him frequenting the studio more often and Pusha T following him around, one day Pusha T is in the studio with the gang and casually decides to write a verse, his first ever verse. Pusha recalls it saying, "Us being in the studio was just the everyday occurrence. One day I was like, man, I'm gonna write a verse, watch," and it happened just like that. I never took the initiative to write. Malice took the initiative to just recently write a book. I would never take the initiative to do things like that. Like, write raps? Why would I do that? It's being around Malice and being the little brother. That's where the rules came from. Okay, that's whack, that's not whack. I learned all of that. Then you get into the studio with my brother and these other guys who produce, and they're showing you structure. I never had the dream of becoming an MC. But as far as Malice tells it, Pusha T was nice off the rip. He spoke on his younger brother's intro to hip-hop saying, "We'd hang out in the studio. Pusha T wanted to get down, so one day he just wrote his first rap, a song called Thief in the Night. And he totally crushed it. I'm talking about his first rap ever. And seeing how I didn't like to do a lot of writing, and neither did he, it was the perfect combination. We'd split the work in half. He would spit 8 bars, and I'd spit 8 bars, and we'd have a 16. But beyond just two brothers collaborating, it was Pharrell that noticed how fast Pusha T could write, while Malice was a slower songwriter. And that led to the Star Trak Records founder to suggest what he called a Cain and Abel-inspired pairing, aka Pusha T and Malice should join forces, combine strengths, and start a group. And just like that, the Clipse was born. Pusha T was initially rapping under the name Terror, and Malice was rapping under the name Malicious. Their group name, the Clipse, was derived from the term the Full Eclipse Crew. That was their original name. And it became that because the two brothers set out on a mission to make their presence overshadow the music industry, becoming the voice of Virginia. Pusha T eventually graduated high school and went to Norfolk State University for a year, then transferred to Tidewater Community College. And at the same time, the chemistry and creation was only getting stronger between Pharrell, Chad, and Malice. Malice says, "Those Neptunes beats just agreed with us so well. It wasn't like we were trying to only use Pharrell, but it was the only thing that made sense." The Terrence brothers quickly started taking rapping a lot more serious, and when Pusha T wasn't at school, he was traveling to New York every other week with Malice and Pharrell to shop demo tapes. After missing too many classes, Pusha T eventually dropped out and committed to music full time. And it didn't take long, only about a year, before the Clipse were able to land their first record deal with Elektra Records in 1996. According to Pusha T, their signing was thanks to the Neptunes' own growing reputation and the Neptunes' strong recommendation of the Clipse. At the time, the Neptunes were also on the rise, so standing next to them and shopping music laced solely with Chad and Pharrell production made the Clipse a no-brainer act to sign. But it didn't necessarily work out the way the Clipse or the label would have hoped. Pusha, Malice, and the Neptunes spent a couple years cooking up their debut album for Elektra Records. It was going to be called Exclusive Audio Footage. On a side note, just like one of Pusha T's old rivals, Lil Wayne, some of the highlights of the Clipse's legacy exist only as leaked online music. A little spoiler, this debut Clipse album would end up getting shelved. It was never released and was only leaked in full onto the internet in around 2022, over 2 decades after it was recorded. Even though the album never made it to record stores, the Clipse did attempt to introduce themselves to the world in the form of a couple singles. Their first single, Got Caught Dealing, failed to get any traction, but they came back shortly after with The Funeral, a powerful track with a bold music video, and this song was definitely ahead of its time. It was inspired by a period when several people close to the Clipse had passed away. Pusha said it felt like they were attending funerals non-stop. So the Funeral song was their way of eulogizing themselves. The beat, which was chaotic and dramatic, captured the energy of a New Orleans second-line procession. But despite the song's strength, it failed to hit the charts and break outside of Virginia radio stations. And this caused Elektra Records to push back the Clipse's debut album, Exclusive Audio Footage, by 1 year. But Pusha and Malice's manager, Rob Walker, saw the early red flags and potential of being stuck in contract hell. So he urged them to leave the label before it was too late. Sylvia Rohn, an executive at the label who had initially signed them, was more focused on the label's bigger hip-hop acts at the time, like Busta Rhymes and Missy Elliott. Now, it's crazy because in 2025, the Clipse went through almost an identical situation where they were forced to buy themselves out of the deal and convince the record label to drop them. But we'll save that for the end of the story. See, by 2021, things ended up working out for both the Clipse and for the fans because not only, like I mentioned before, their debut album that got shelved by Elektra Records did end up leaking in full in 2022, and then released on Spotify for fans to hear. But Pusha T actually said in a 2005 interview that getting dropped from Elektra Records was the motivation the group needed to kick things up a notch and truly thrive. Pusha said, Elektra was a time where honestly we weren't taking the music business that seriously. We didn't know anything about the game at all. We were on Elektra, we shot the funeral video, and then we find out from our management that the label was putting us on the back burner. They had Missy and Busta going on, and we were not even recognizing that we were not being paid attention to. I thank Sylvia Rohn to this day. She let us go. She was a G about it. She was like, you're right. We are really focusing on Missy and Busta. Go do what y'all do. She hit us off with a bunch of money. Like, you know what I mean? It was a good time. So we were like, cool, on to the next project. So when I say the same thing happened in 2025, I actually mean the complete opposite, because the first time around when the Clipse got dropped, Elektra Records actually paid them to leave the label. However, while the Clipse brothers might have not been too discouraged about the shelving of the debut album, them getting dropped from the label, Pharrell definitely was. Pusha T told XXL, I'm going to tell you who was disappointed the most. That was Pharrell. He was like real hyped about working with established artists, but he's always been like, yo, we got to show them how we do it. So with Skateboard P being determined to lead the Clipse and the Neptunes and Virginia to mainstream success, and off the heels of some massive production credits on hits like Jay-Z's Give It To Me or Mystical Shake Your ASS, Pharrell and Chad grinded, no pun intended, to establish their own record label, Star Trak Entertainment, under Arista Records in 2001. Pharrell brought No Malice and Pusha T in to sign as the label's first artist, and together with the Neptunes, the Clipse released their debut album, Lord Willing, on August 20th, 2022. But it wasn't just a record deal from the Neptunes that quickly catapulted the Clipse into stardom. It took a lot of, again, no pun intended, grinding, and a bit of taunting on Pusha T's end to his buddy Pharrell. Pusha T knew that the group needed a massive single to break them out and get the label to start paying attention to them. So he would tease Pharrell almost in a reverse psychology type of way to push Pharrell, no pun intended, to Pusha P, to cook up his best beats. In a 2002 interview, Pusha said, I'd be like to Pharrell, you got some alright joints, but you have not made no mother effing crucial stuff. Look, I think you've been going to the movies too much. Did you get Hollywood? You got rich? Pharrell started yelling, screaming, called Chad and asked him, do you hear this stuff? Do you hear this stuff? He said that 1,000 times and then kicked everybody out of the room. Hours later, Pharrell calls Pusha T back and told him, I got some heat for you, but it came with a price. Pharrell told Pusha T, if you don't get back to the studio in exactly 7 minutes, I'm giving this beat away to Jay-Z. And it was the beat that would later become their breakout hit single, Grinding. But at first, Malice didn't fully see the vision of the sonics Pharrell was cooking. Malice said, I was like, Pharrell, something's missing, and I'm ashamed of this. I don't even want to say this. I think I've been lying in every other interview, but I'm going to tell the truth. I didn't get Grinding, man. But Malice wasn't alone. See, the major label executives didn't get it either, and they weren't putting money behind it right off the bat. Pusha says the success of the song originally stemmed from the fact that he would take any performance opportunity he could just to get the song out there. Night after night, he would perform these dusty nightclubs for $1,500 until they built a small fan base that loved the track, and only by that point did Arista Records ever decide to even market it. Off the steam the song picked up initially thanks to constant small-time performances from the Clipse, their label CEO and president L.A. Reid reportedly threatened to fire staff if they could not get the song onto the Billboard charts. The record eventually hit number 30 on the chart, and then their follow-up single, When the Last Time, did even better, breaking the top 20 at number 19. And as their single started climbing the charts, the Clipse actually admitted that they were a bit nervous over how their debut album would perform once they gave it to the world. You can tell Pusha T has massively grown out of this insecurity ever since he pursued a solo career, because he never really mentions chart positions or first week sales numbers anymore. But it's interesting that in a 2002 XXL interview right before their first album came out, Pusha T admits to being obsessed with sales numbers. To quote the interview, it says, as the Clipse's undeniable hit Grinding blasts from the radio of Malice's gray Benz truck, the duo revealed their insecurities about the long-time incoming debut album. For his part, Malice is concerned about the album's late August release date. Pusha T, on the other hand, admits to being addicted to SoundScan sales figures. He can quote the statistics on almost any current rap release, and he praised the group breaks 100,000 copies in their first week. See, before you had DJ Big Macus and Akademiks reporting first week sales numbers, it was SoundScan that would publish these sales numbers. And I guess back before their first album, Pusha T knew all the sales numbers for all the other major rap artists and albums at the time, and maybe that's why he ended up going at Lil Wayne or Drake at the height of their mainstream careers, because he knew all the numbers, the sales, but in Cash Money's case, he also knew who all that profit was really going to. But we'll get to that later on in this video. Anyways, it seems like an early Pusha T got exactly what he wanted because their debut album, Lord Willing, smashed his 100K expectations, hitting number 4 on the Billboard chart, selling 122,000 copies within its first week. It's since gone gold and remains the Clipse's best-selling record of all time. And just like that, with a classic debut album under their belt, the Clipse had eclipsed the industry. The Clipse's mainstream success would only continue to rise over the next few years, with NSYNC's biggest member Justin Timberlake working heavily with the Neptunes at the time on his solo album. Justin was put onto the Clipse and became a massive fan. He demanded that the Clipse feature on his breakout first solo single, Like I Love You. Pusha T is still appreciative for this massive moment because with Justin being the huge artist that he was at the time, and all eyes being on him to venture off into his own solo career, he could have easily featured a much bigger rapper on the song. The track was an immediate hit, peaking at number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100, and by 2003, the Clipse continued their collaborative nature with Justin Timberlake by joining him on the McDonald's I'm Lovin' It campaign. Now, it's been rumored that Pusha T actually helped write the I'm Lovin' It jingle and coining that catchphrase. You know, like, Bada ba ba ba, I'm lovin' it? Yeah, that really might be Pusha T, according to him. Now, while this ended up being a very valuable catchphrase, it was an even more valuable financial lesson that the Clipse had to learn early on. Because Pusha T claims even though the I'm Lovin' It term became a staple of the McDonald's brand, he was only paid $500,000 for his contribution to it. Meanwhile, Justin Timberlake made $6 million and secured publishing off the campaign, while the Clipse didn't receive any royalties. Pusha T learned from his mistake and now actually owns 40% of the We Have the Meats campaign for the fast food chain Arby's. So yeah, aside from being a rapper, Pusha T also became a jingle writer for fast food restaurants. But along with that McDonald's mishap, the Clipse and the Neptunes would also learn another important financial lesson around this same time, which would trickle on to spark some of the biggest beefs hip-hop has ever seen. You've probably heard the story. If Birdman just paid Pharrell, we wouldn't have the story of Adin, the Wayne and Pusha beef, the Travis Pusha beef over Meltdown. Kanye might have not spiraled over Drake. Maybe Wayne and Birdman would have never had their issues if Exodus 23:1 never came out, which was all thanks to Pharrell not being paid by Birdman. Hell, even Kendrick might have never inherited the beef from Pusha T and gave us the crip-walking, carefully constructed Canadian casket-carving craft that he did throughout his beef with Drake. All if Birdman just paid Pharrell. So back in 2002, Birdman and the Cash Money Collective actually had a decent bond with the Neptunes and the Clipse. Pusha T even listed Juvenile's song Ha as one of his biggest inspirations early on, calling it the greatest thing since sliced bread and being so floored by the aesthetic within Juvie's music video for the song that Pusha T used the same director for the early Clipse music video for the song The Funeral. Birdman and Wayne were also some of the first major artists that the Clipse featured on their project, with a 20-year-old Lil Wayne and Birdman rapping on the official remix to the Clipse's first hit, Grindin'. The Clipse returned the favor by linking back up with Birdman for his single, What Happened to That Boy, and the admiration went both ways. Birdman said Pharrell was the first producer he ever worked with outside of Cash Money's in-house beatmaker Manny Fresh, and that the whole concept of What Happened to That Boy actually stemmed from Pharrell.
Yeah.
What happened to that boy?
Yeah. Pharrell put that together, bro. Pharrell did the beat. Pharrell wanted to work with me, and I wanted to work with him. That was really the first producer I worked outside of Fresh. Pharrell kind of came with the hook, too, bro. Like, part. He was like, Stunner, you do that part and get them to do that part. That was a magical moment. That was the only time I got to work with Pharrell, but it was definitely a match.
Now you can hear it here. Birdman almost sounds sad that he was never able to work with Pharrell again. But allegedly that was intentional. See, Cash Money is notorious for never paying their artists on time, right? What Happened to That Boy ended up being a hit. Like Birdman said, Pharrell crafted not just the beat, but the whole concept of the song, and Birdman crafted the paperwork, since it was a Cash Money song on his album. And very shortly after the success of the song, What Happened to That Boy became What Happened to That Bag. No profits to the Clipse or Pharrell, and Pharrell allegedly, according to Ebro, vowed to never work with a Cash Money artist again. But in 2015, when Pusha did an interview with Ebro, he claims he doesn't remember where the issue actually stemmed from between him versus Cash Money artists, but instead, he thought it was due to a misunderstood message in the next big Clipse single in 2006, which spiraled into a nasty Lil Wayne interview, and whatever it was, the bad business blood from What Happened to That Boy bolstered a canon event that birthed beefs spanning decades. Not just one beef, you could connect at least 5 of the biggest rap beefs to the What Happened to That Boy song. But that's a video for another day. I'll give you the synopsis. Basically, Pharrell and the Clipse don't get paid from their Birdman collab. Pharrell vows to never work with a Cash Money artist again. Pharrell and Chad's clothing brands like Billionaire Boys Club and The Bape become the hottest streetwear brands in hip-hop. Lil Wayne requests some pieces from Pharrell. Skateboard P doesn't send anything over to him, so Wayne wears the clothing anyways in music videos and magazine covers. He gets credit for being the one bringing it to the forefront of the mainstream, and people think the Clipse then sneak diss Wayne on their next single, Mr. Me Too, and how Wayne copied their style. We're going to focus on that part of the story next up, but I just want you guys to see how many beefs popped off because of this one song, What Happened to That Boy. Wayne and Pusha trade bars. Drake comes around in 2009. The new Cash Money poster boy, new Pusha T target. Exodus 23-1 in 2012 releases. Pusha emphasizes that Cash Money is structured like a pyramid scheme where one rapper signed to another who signed to another. And of course, that's because he saw these signs early on when he collaborated with Birdman on What Happened to That Boy in 2002. Drake and Pusha have their beef. Kanye gets dragged into it, causing him to flip-flop between siding with Pusha and Drake. That was the beginning of the end for Ye and Pusha's relationship. Years later, Drake buys Pharrell's jewelry at an auction and taunts the Clipse and Pharrell about it in music, specifically on a Travis feature, on an album that Pharrell was also featured on, and Travis had interrupted a Clipse studio session to play the album without the Drake verse. Now Pusha's going at Travis for snaking out all the guys he's around, including Drake himself, when Travis on stage asked Metro Boomin to play the song Like That, which had a Kendrick verse, which started a beef with him and Drake that stemmed from the fact that Kendrick wanted to inherit Drake's beef with Pharrell. Kendrick winning that beef led him to be selected as the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show performer, which was a choice handpicked by Jay-Z and Roc Nation, which led Nicki Minaj to jump in saying Wayne deserved the slot more than Kendrick, and she then went down a rabbit hole of attacking Jay-Z on Twitter for the span of months. And comment if I'm forgetting something here, but as you can see, this is a long evolution of beefs between most of hip-hop's biggest players that all stems back to the lack of payment over one song. What happened to that boy? So if the Clipse fallout with Elektra Records taught them not to stick around on a label that's not investing in you, their fallout with Cash Money taught them not to invest in a label that won't stick around when it's time to invest in repaying artists. But let's take it back to the first beef that stemmed from the Cash Money Clipse conflict continuum. Because when Pusha's asked decades later what really started his beef with Cash Money, he said it all stemmed from a Wayne interview during a time when the Clipse couldn't release any music.
You guys always rapped about that street life and somewhat of Birdman and Wayne, they talk about that. Was that what it was?
I feel like this was the time where like the internet and fans were being very vocal. Fans would be like, man, you into this or you talking like that and you sounding like him. He did an interview that wasn't diplomatic. You gotta be smart enough to not let people instigate. And at that time, I was going through like wild label stuff and I wasn't putting out music like that. So you can't have somebody that big say disparaging things against you.
And you see, that would make sense, right? If Wayne at the time is one of the biggest artists and he's dissing the Clipse and they can't fight back because they're fighting their label and their label won't let them put out music, they're forced to let this giant rapper tarnish their reputation while they can't invest in releasing music to diss him back or even invest in a marketing budget to build back up their buzz. They're forced to sit there in silence as one of the biggest rappers in the game is dissing them. I believe it was a big misunderstanding that we'll touch on shortly, but before that whole beef went down, before the Clipse beef with their record label, in the What Happened to That Boys days, Clipse are still making massive noise within hip-hop. So what stopped their label from backing them years later when Wayne started dissing them? Was it Pharrell's fault? Because didn't he sign the Clipse to his label? Well, not exactly. See, Pharrell and Chad's label Star Trak was a label under a bigger label called Arista Records. The Clipse were signed to Star Trak, therefore they were under Arista Records. Now pay attention because there's a lot of names here. So in 2004, Arista enters into a merger with Sony Records. Sony owns a record company called Jive. Arista Records and all their artists end up being dissolved by Jive Records. So when Pusha T says you're signed to a guy who's signed to another guy, he's talking from first-hand experience, right? In 2004, the Clipse, who were initially under Pharrell's label Star Trak, which was under Arista Records, well now Arista Records was under Jive Records, which was under Sony Records. Jive was more known for producing pop acts like Britney Spears and NSYNC, and they didn't necessarily have the same experience marketing a hip-hop act, especially one as gritty as the Clipse. And you might think that's fine because Pharrell's still in the picture, so he'll make sure the Clipse are good, right? Well, here's the thing. During this merger, Pharrell's label Star Trak had their contract expired from their parent company, Arista Records. So the label moved to a new home under Virgin Records, which was under UMG. It's complicated, but basically there's 3 big labels, right? UMG, Sony, and Warner Brothers. And all the smaller labels are under them. So now the Clipse and the Neptunes are under different big umbrellas. The Clipse got moved to Sony, and Star Trak struck a new deal with UMG. And this is where things went wrong. You might also think, why didn't the Clipse just move wherever Star Trak did? Because that's the label they were initially signed to. Well, the problem was they were stuck under Jive because they didn't fully fulfill the terms of their contract, so they couldn't switch from Sony to UMG. But they were under Jive Records, and with Jive's lack of expertise in promoting rap artists, it was hard for the label to generate buzz for the Clipse's upcoming second album. And if they didn't release it, they were stuck under this contract. So by 2005, years after the success of their first album, Lord Willin', the Clipse were in a tough position. In an interview at the time, Pusha said, "It was just one of those things that we were at home at Arista Records. We were signed by L.A. Reid, he understood us, and he knew what was going on. He knew what it took to break these street records. He listened to our vision and basically followed it. It went from there to being acquired by Jive Records, who are people that really specialize in pop music. It's just one of those things where the Clipse have not gotten the attention that we were supposed to get. And remember, L.A. Reid was the one forcing executives to promote the single Grinding until it cracked the Billboard charts. He understood the Clipse's vision and who to market them to, and he was gone now, and the executives at Jive weren't able to fill his shoes in that sense. So if it wasn't obvious already, the last thing that the Clipse wanted was a delay of their sophomore album. In fact, after their first project, Lord Willin', they were back in the studio right away and planned to release the next project a year later in 2003. But with the Jive merger in 2004, the plans got completely ruined. We got a couple very brief glimpses of what the Clipse's second album could have sounded like if it was released when they initially intended to. It was obvious the Clipse were headed in a much more radio-friendly direction than their first album, because one track that was intended as the lead single for Hell Hath No Fury was the song called Pussycat. And just by the name alone, you can tell this song represented a drastic sonic departure from hard-edged tracks like Grinding or Virginia, right? It leaned more towards the club sound that was dominating the charts at the time. The brothers chose to place that song on the Barbershop 2 soundtrack instead, and another early track, Stunnin' Y'all, which featured Pharrell, was also pulled from the Clipse's original second album, but instead it was placed on a mixtape when the second project got shelved on Jive Records. And in an archived 2003 MTV article, it even references a track called Mama I'm So Sorry, which did end up making it onto the final version of their second album. However, the original version reportedly featured R. Kelly, which obviously meant at the time the Clipse were going for a more pop-friendly, radio-friendly approach with this project. And this was the only glimpse fans had into what the initial version of Hell Hath No Fury might have sounded like. More upbeat, club-friendly, and in step with the party-oriented rap of that era. But what eventually dropped in 2006 was drastically different. An album built on gritty minimalism, heavy drums, and street-level storytelling, far removed from the flashy, polished Neptune sound that was popular at the time. They weren't doing no drop it like it's hot. Now you might be thinking, wow, Jive Records, so a company that was focused mainly on pop artists and didn't know how to market the Clipse, and because of that their album got delayed for many years, they ended up letting them go with the type of sound we heard on Hell Hath No Fury after shelving the album for so many years. There wasn't a Britney Spears level hit single on this album, there wasn't even a 50 Cent type of single on this project. Why would Jive let them do this? Well, this isn't exactly how it worked out. See, frustrated with the years of constant delays, the Clipse requested a release from their contract with Jive that they had not fulfilled yet, so Jive denied it, prompting the Clipse to actually file a lawsuit against the record label. The lawsuit, of course, stemmed from the fact that Jive refused to release Hell Hath No Fury or free the Clipse from their contract, leaving the duo in nearly a 4-year stalemate. And to regain control, the Clipse formed Re-Up Records, their own label, as a means to release music independently while they were still tied to Jive. On May 9, 2006, they reached an agreement with Jive to distribute Hell Hath No Fury through Re-Up Records, allowing them to maintain creative autonomy. Re-Up Records was not just a label, but a strategic move to bypass Jive's restrictions, later evolving into a platform for their side project, Re-Up Gang, with rappers Ab Liva and Sandman. While embroiled in the lawsuit, the Clipse released We Got It For Cheap, volumes 1 and 2 of the legendary mixtape series in 2004 and 2005, and it featured Re-Up Gang members. These mixtapes capitalized on the growing online music scene, as fans were shifting from physical CDs CDs to digital consumption. Malice had emphasized their intent with these mixtape projects, saying, "We decided to put out the mixtapes to stay relevant. They helped us keep our sanity." The series became a cult favorite, earning accolades like Mixtape of the Year for Volume 2, and the internet buzz driven by these mixtapes marked the Clipse as pioneers in leveraging digital platforms. Pusha T later reflected on this in an interview years after digital music consumption became the norm, saying the mixtape circuit was digitizing much faster than the means to track audiences. Basically, when they were selling CDs, Pusha can just look at the SoundScan reports to see how much he sold and how big the demand was. But the landscape was changing. Even in the mid-2000s, fans were getting their mixtapes from blogs, websites, pirating websites like LimeWire. These were used a lot more than going to a bootlegger to buy a physical mixtape. But because it was still the early stages of the internet, it was hard to track the download volume. This was 2005, before, the DatPiffs, the actual websites that showed you how many times your mixtape was downloaded, and long before Spotify, of course. There was no measurement of success for these projects at all. The only time the Clipse actually noticed that throughout their hiatus, their fan base actually kept growing was when they would do performances. See, the re-up mixtape's online success, even though it wasn't yet accompanied by an actual studio album, it actually did a good job at broadening the Clipse's audience, attracting younger, internet-savvy fans alongside their traditional street rap base that their debut album had brought in. This shift had diversified their show demographics, blending quote-unquote hipsters with felons and thugs, as Pusha T described it. He said, "It was a pleasant surprise. We didn't know who our fan base was." The Neptunes' avant-garde production combined with Clipse's vivid storytelling resonated with this new demographic, enhancing their cultural cachet. This influence also extended and expanded to fashion, with every rich college kid living off their parents' income had immersed themselves into the gloriously dark underworld that the Clipse rapped about. They weren't just selling out the shows, they were selling out the stores. Chad had Bape, Pharrell had BBC, and the Clipse had it all on. These two brands were the biggest thing in streetwear fashion at the time. And another rapper who, just like the Clipse, was on an insane mixtape run at the time, Lil Weezy F, like we mentioned before, he wanted to get in on the fashion trend set by the Neptunes and the Clipse, so he reached out for some free clothes, and he couldn't get any, likely due to the bad blood bolstered by Birdman's brutal business. But even though Pharrell rejected him, he wore the Bape clothes anyways in the Hustler music video and on a Vibe magazine cover. And around the same time, the Clipse settled their lawsuit with Jive and Gear Up to finally drop their sophomore album with the release of its first single, Mr. Me Too, in 2006. Now, while the track didn't make it onto the Billboard Hot 100, it was a bold, disruptive statement, addressing all the imitators who had popped up in the game since the Clipse had been on their 4-year album hiatus. You gotta remember, we're now in 2006, and while the Clipse stood out on their debut for the gritty street tales of coke dealings throughout their music, by 2006, this was almost a norm, as you now had a whole wave of new rappers rapping in similar dark styles and echoing similar lived experiences, stories, and subject matter. Think of Jeezy, T.I., Rick Ross's intro into the game. It was all during the Clipse's hiatus. And of course, you can't forget Lil Wayne, who not only echoed similar subject matter, but was rocking the same exact clothes, right? So Pusha T had confirmed that Mr. Me Too did address imitators and rappers who studied and copied the duo style, but he denied that it was specifically a subtle diss to Lil Wayne. However, fans and journalists couldn't help but align the jabs with Weezy's current situation at the time. Because Wayne was a bigger artist at the time, again, the Clipse are dominating the underground mixtape game, but Wayne's mainstream. So him wearing Bape so often on all these big magazine covers, some casuals confused him as the pioneer of that style. He gets asked about this in a 2006 interview with Complex, and this is where things heat up. Let's go through this whole interview. So the interviewer asks, "I guess one thing you've become known for is being a styled trendsetter. You were rocking the Bape on the cover of Vibe. Now it seems like all rappers are starting to rock Bape. So where are you trying to take it next fashion-wise?" Lil Wayne said, "I really just do my thing, because you're getting interviewed and saying stuff about this brand and that brand, this new style, and then people are going to read it and be like, this guy thinks he's a trendsetter. No, you do what you do, and you let the mother effers do it. I didn't get in here and say nothing about Bape in that interview, but that's what y'all got from it." The interviewer then asks, "I'm sure you've heard that the Clipse are coming back right now, and one of the things that they've been saying is like, yo, all these dudes, now they do the Bape and the coke rap, but before, that was us. We were the ones that started that. How do you, Lil Wayne, feel about that?" Lil Wayne said, "I don't rap about no coke. He's not talking about me. I don't rap about coke. I've been rich since I was 14 years old off of selling records. I do not rap about no damn coke. If I did say anything about coke, I speak the truth about it. Stop beating around the bush talking about I guess. Stop trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense, dog. Stop trying to make sense out of that stuff. I talk about the money I've made since I was 14. I put out a platinum album and reaped every dollar from it. A platinum album makes $15 million. They gotta give me some of that $15 million, you dig? I was 14 when it happened. I did it 4 times again after that, just on the charts. I ain't gotta talk about no damn Coke or no damn Bapes. I got my own shoes out, the OG Reebok. I got my own jeans out. Stop coming at me with that BS. That's how you get beef started, man. The interviewer goes on to say, well, you know, XXL has the... Lil Wayne interrupts him, but what he was trying to say was he was asking Lil Wayne about Coke and how, you know, the clips say everyone's rapping about Coke. They're copying it from us because XXL had listed Wayne as one of, you know, the rappers rapping about cocaine. They had him in this feature that they did about cocaine rap. And Lil Wayne replied saying, I don't see guys like that. You're talking to the best. Talk to me like you're talking to the best. I don't see no effing Clipse, man. Come on, man. Weezy, man. They have to do a song with us to get hot, B. What happened to that boy? Come on, dog. Don't do that. This is a effing legend you're talking to right here. 14 years. How many years those guys been around? Who the F is Pharrell? Do you really respect him? That guy wore Bapes and y'all thought he was weird. I wore it, y'all thought it was hot. Come on, man. And following this interview, and this was the one that Pusha T was referencing in terms of what started the beef with Cash Money with Lil Wayne, because of course, Lil Wayne does this interview talking about who the F are the Clipse and who the F is Pharrell. I made Bape hot. He's saying all this stuff as the Clipse are fighting their label Jive, so they can't really respond in the form of a record because they can't release a record, right? So what they do is release an interview. They get interviewed by Laced magazine, and they ask a bunch of questions about Lil Wayne. So, question number 1, how do you feel about Lil Wayne saying he's the greatest rapper alive? Malice chimes in saying, if you wobbledy, you can't be a legend. And that's in reference to, of course, Lil Wayne's feature on Juvie's Back That Thing Up, where he goes, you know, wobbledy, drop it like it's hot. Malice is saying, if those are the bars you're coming with, you're not a legend. Pusha T then chimes in saying, you can't kiss other men, you can't wobbledy, and you can't bite styles. You can't bite everybody's style. You can't try to rap like Jay-Z, dress like the Clipse, become a coke dealer after 5 albums, and now dress like Jim Jones. You can't do all that and be a legend. You have to be a trendsetter, and he's not sending any trends. Then they asked the Clipse, just a few years ago, you're doing What Happened to That Boy with Birdman. Now today, Lil Wayne isn't saying nice things about you. Where do you think that animosity is stemming from? Pusha T answers saying, yeah, Gilly the Kid wrote Baby's verse on that, by the way. The streets saying he was biting the Clipse. The Clipse never said he was biting us because it didn't really matter to us. Malice then chimes in saying, the streets did all that talking. The Clipse would go on to release the 3rd volume of their We Got It For Cheap mixtape series in 2008, and they also dissed Lil Wayne on the intro to that album rapping, sorry, but I don't respect who you're applauding. The guy flows, but his metaphors are boring. Don't make me turn daddy's little girl to orphan. That would mean I have to kill Baby like abortion. And of course, Baby is another nickname for Birdman. And Wayne always says Birdman was like his daddy, his father figure, right? They have a song together, Stuntin' Like My Daddy. Pusha T here is saying that Lil Wayne to Birdman is daddy's little girl. In 2010, the beef actually kind of died down, of course, with Malice stepping back from the group. He's asked about where the beef actually originated from and said it never deserved any kind of attention. The streets were talking about him wearing Bapes. I think Wayne took it out on us. That same year, Lil Wayne actually got locked up, and Pusha T even referenced this in a positive light, making amends with Lil Wayne, rapping on the song Open Your Eyes. They done freed Weezy, congratulations. And then he elaborated in an interview saying, ever since Lil Wayne went into jail, that whole little stint between me and him is really dead and over with. I met him one time in Miami and congratulated him on getting out of prison. But then of course we know what happened in 2012. Wayne took a step back and Drake replaced him at the forefront of Cash Money, so Pusha had a new target. But hold up, we're still in 2006 here. So finally, in November of 2006, Hell Hath No Fury was released. It debuted at 14 on the Billboard 200 chart with 80,000 copies sold in the first week, which was a noticeable drop from their debut album's opening numbers. But also keep in mind, there was a 4-year wait in between both albums. And regardless, despite the commercial dip, many fans and critics hail the album as the duo's magnum opus. Pusha T even ranked the album as one of the greatest albums ever made, behind only Thriller and Purple Rain, and even argued that it might surpass Purple Rain. And even though they weren't selling as much as their rival Lil Wayne at the time, it was expected. See, the Clipse knew the project wouldn't be a commercial juggernaut. That's why they leaned into an unorthodox approach, prioritizing substance, unconventional production, and authenticity over mainstream appeal. They wanted to deliver something raw, real, and experimental to the core audience that had stuck around through the entire underground mixtape days. And even though their core fans loved the project, the Clipse still remained dissatisfied. They felt that Jive Records didn't properly promote the album, focusing again more on their pop acts, and that sentiment only deepened the wedge between the group and the label. So about 6 months later, in May of 2007, the Clipse revealed they had officially parted ways with Jive. By October of that year, they signed a 5-year 50-50 profit-sharing deal with Columbia Records for their Re-Up Gang imprint. And this is where we get to where many fans thought would be the final chapter. See, now we're in 2008, which turned out to be an incredibly active year for the Clipse. In February, they dropped the third installment of their We Got It For Cheap mixtape series. That was quickly followed up by the Re-Up Gang, The Saga Continues in April. Then in August, the group released Clipse Presents The Re-Up Gang, which served as the official debut album for the Re-Up Gang collective. Remember how Malice was happy that Pusha T joined him in a group because now the work was split in half, with Pusha T taking half the verse, Malice taking half the verse? Well, now they were a collective of 4, and that's why their output expanded massively, right? They released 3 albums or 3 projects in the span of like 6 months. And later that year in November, the Clipse expanded beyond music by launching their own fashion line called Play Cloths. To build hype for both the brand and their next album, they also released a promotional mixtape titled Road to Til the Casket Drops in December of 2008. In April 2009, the Clipse unveiled the first single for their upcoming album, a track called Kinda Like a Big Deal, featuring Kanye West. The song debuted online via the Clipse's Playcloths blog, but unfortunately, it did not chart on the Billboard charts. But they were still continuing their reign as the early leaders of the blog era, completely capitalizing off the buzz they built offline and the massive community of internet users that were now massive fans of the Clipse. However, that internet fandom unfortunately did not translate to mainstream success, because when they finally dropped Til the Casket Drops, the third Clipse album, in December of 2009, it debuted only at 46 on the Billboard charts, selling 31,000 copies in the first week, a far cry from the 80,000 that their second album did, and far beyond the 122,000 that their first album did. And I think by this point, this is when Pusha T kind of stopped caring about the mainstream success, the album sales, all that stuff, right? Again, remember, in 2002, he was obsessed with it. By 2009, they make their most pop-sounding project, but it ends up being their worst performing one on the charts. I actually kind of like the project, but you could definitely see, even in Pusha T's solo career, like this was the most blatant attempt at appealing to a larger audience that the Clipse has ever done, right? And in an interview with Complex, Pusha T even explained that that was intentional to reach a broader demographic by pleasing both street audiences and commercial listeners. But behind the scenes, life was shifting drastically for the duo. See, in 2009, the Clipse were caught in the middle of a major federal investigation, and their longtime manager, Anthony Gonzalez, was sentenced to 32 years in prison on drug trafficking charges. Several close associates were also indicted in this case, and the legal fallout shook the group to its core, especially Malice, who was beginning to reflect deeply on his life and his lyrics. See, again, unlike Pusha T, since he started rapping, Malice has always expressed remorse in his music, wrestling with his past and seeking redemption. In a DJ Vlad interview, he even questioned how many lives have been lost with the Clipse's music playing in the background. These reflections weighed heavily on him, and after the release of Til the Casket Drops, Malice felt it was the right time for Pusha to go solo, while Malice himself made a personal transformation. Years later, Pusha would reflect on that third album that they did, saying that you could hear it in Malice's raps that he's ready to leave. He's telling the world that he is leaving, but I just wasn't paying attention to it. By 2012, Malice had publicly changed his name to No Malice, signaling a major shift in identity that was rooted within his Christian faith. He declared that he no longer held any evil intentions in his heart, but even though he took a separate path to his brother, their bond remained intact. Of course, Pusha T launched a solo career that would eventually include arguably several classic albums of his own, and while the Clipse had a history of battling the different labels they were signed to, Pusha T ended up climbing the ranks of the Good Music label, becoming the president of possibly the highest regarded rap collective of the blog era, an era that Malice and Pusha T both helped pioneer in their early stages. Over the years, rumors swirled of a Clipse reunion, and offers came in, often with huge sums of money attached, but No Malice repeatedly declined. Pusha was always open to a reunion, but he made it clear that it would only happen if his brother felt the timing and the purpose were right. Then, in 2019, fans finally got their wish, and the purpose definitely felt right, at least in part. The Clipse reunited for a track called Use This Gospel on Kanye's Christian album. Looking back on this reunion though, Pusha says it wasn't as holy and perfect as it might have seemed on the outside. In a 2025 GQ interview, Pusha T discussed the Clipse reunion and the role that Kanye's Use This Gospel song played in reuniting the chemistry between the Thornton brothers. But Pusha T was actually hesitant to invite Malice to these sessions with Kanye West, describing them as a very chaotic environment. The interview reads, saying, during sessions at his Wyoming ranch for what could have been his Jesus album, Kanye asked Pusha for Malice's number. Pusha was in the early throes of disillusionment with what it meant to be in Kanye's orbit, living through the foolishness, as Pusha describes it. Even though their union would sustain for 2 or 3 more years, Pusha says he didn't want to bring Malice into the foolishness. Still, Malice gave his blessing and ended up coming out to Wyoming with Pusha. I don't deal with foolishness at all, Malice says with a smirk, but I saw what Pusha was talking about. As frustrating as the experience ultimately was, it served as a crucial spark for the reunion. It yielded the first official new Clipse track in Use This Gospel, but the sessions were even more fruitful than fans had realized, because they initially had rapped on Kanye's Follow God beat, and they were gaining some traction. Pusha says, I feel like we were suddenly convinced that a reunion could happen. But there was so much going on with the whole Kanye circle, if we decided we were going to jump into it, then we should be jumping into it. It wasn't progressing like that. So I think if anything, this was a stumble on just trying to make it happen and everybody not just being on the same time schedule. That was bothersome to me. Ironically, the two brothers being more productive together than they had been in so many years actually made Pusha more frustrated, since the stuff they were creating together was still stuck under Kanye's umbrella. He knows I don't think of him as a man, Pusha says about Kanye. He knows it, and that's why we can't build together anymore. That's why me and him don't click, because he knows what I really think of him. He showed me the weakest sides of him, and he knows what I think of weak people. We made some great stuff. We did. He's a genius, and his intuition is even more genius level, right? But that's why me and him can't get along, because he sees through my fakeness with him. He knows I don't think he's a man. And remember, Pusha's a loyal guy, right? And because he's still the president of the Good Music label, he feels his loyalty lies with Kanye no matter how shady, snaky, or unstable Kanye's being. But it did hit a boiling point during the sessions for the Donda album in 2021, when Pusha finally felt too isolated and betrayed to let things continue further. He says, I realized at that point I was really alone in everything that was going on as far as rap drama. I'm in a collective of a lot of individuals, everyone's working, but I really got stuff to do. And I leave and it's one energy, and when I come back to these Donda sessions, the energy's off. And then you hear about the sidebar conversations. You got your homeboy coming up to you who's like, yo, when you left, they were saying this and this about you. I'm thinking we're all in this collectively getting busy. But in all actuality, everyone had their own agendas. But while one brotherhood was destroyed, another one had re-emerged. See, the last time Kanye and Pusha had worked together was when Kanye handled half the production on Pusha T's last solo album, It's Almost Dry, and Pharrell handled the other half of the production on that project. On the last song of the project, Malice makes his grand return with Pusha T, starting his verse off asking, tell me what I missed. It was after this that the Clipse announced that the chemistry was building back up to the point where they felt confident that they could finally actually bring a new Clipse project 15 years later back to the fans. At this point, Pharrell is working closely with Pusha, and Malice joins in the mix once again, and they move out to the Louis Vuitton headquarters in Paris in 2023 to build the foundation of the Clipse's massive reunion album. After months, years of intense recording sessions, the Clipse are finally ready to release the album in summer of 2024. However, just like the long history of label issues that they've had throughout their entire career, there's another bottleneck that stands in the way of the release of this project. Again, one that seems to be a recurring theme throughout the entirety of them attempting to release albums. Things go well, creative strides are made, then label issues come in to muddy the waters. In 1997, they had to request to be dropped from Elektra Records, feeling like they were being shelved to bigger artists like Missy and Busta, and on the cusp of being stuck in contractual hell. By 2003, they were unwillingly placed under a new label due to a merger, which prioritized pop acts, and that caused them to sue the label to get out of the deal. And now 20 years later in 2025, the Clipse's new home of Def Jam was playing these same type of games with them, prioritizing their relationship with Drake over the value of a Clipse 15-year comeback album. After presenting the completed album to Def Jam in the summer of 2024, Pusha says the label balked at Kendrick's verse on the song Chains and Whips. It was recorded about a month after the Kendrick-Drake beef, when Not Like Us is the biggest song in the world. And of course, with Drake just 5 years before that taking a massive loss to Pusha T in another rap battle, UMG were allegedly concerned over the antagonistic optics of two of Drake's biggest enemies linking on wax. Pusha T calls their apprehension stupid, primarily because none of the bars in Kendrick's verse could really be perceived as a shot or even a subliminal to Drake. Pusha says they wanted me to ask Kendrick to censor his verse, which of course I was never doing, and then they wanted me to take the record off the album. And so after about a month of not doing it, Steve Golly, the lawyer over at Def Jam, was like, we'll just drop the Clipse. But that can't work because I'm still there as a solo artist. But if you let us both go, that could work. But it wasn't so easy. See, Pusha T had to cough up 7 figures to get out of this Def Jam deal. And again, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of the clarity on label dynamics, you might be wondering, oh, if the Clipse is signed to Def Jam, what does that have to do with Drake almost suing UMG and then being scared of releasing a Kendrick and Pusha song when Drake is threatening to sue? Well, again, UMG is one of the big 3 record labels and they owned Def Jam, the same label Pusha was signed to. Drake was also signed to UMG, but under a different record label, a smaller one called Republic Records. So Pusha T and Malice moved their project over to Roc Nation, which welcomes them in open arms, refusing to censor any single verse off the project and releasing their message to the world in the way it was fully intended. After a 15-year battle full of label issues, RICO cases, federal indictments, regaining faith, losing family, censorship behind the scenes, new homes, constantly moving labels and restructuring the dynamics of the Clipse, they were finally able to go back to the roots of where it all began. In a studio with Pharrell, cooking up the highest level of gritty, raw raps and production that hip-hop has ever known. The Clipse made their grand return on July 11, 2025. It should be today, the day that I'm releasing this video. And this project is amazing. I have a full video breaking down most of the standouts on the project, some feature verses, the one that costed Pusha T 7 figures to get out of the deal for, of course, that Kendrick verse, the bars Pharrell's rapping, and of course, in my opinion, the standouts on the album, all of the Malice verses. So be sure to check that video out. I'll try to link it right here. All in all, the Clipse, of course, one of the most legendary duos in hip-hop. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you in the next one.